The grand old house on Elmwood Street stood silent under a blanket of stars, its many windows dark except for the soft glow emanating from the library inside. 8-year-old Eleanor Percival sat curled on a velvet chaise, a book forgotten in her lap. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Percival, occupied their usual chairs. He immersed in financial ledgers, she meticulously mending fine lace. The air hummed with a quiet respectability, thick as the velvet drapes, yet Eleanor felt a peculiar hollowness. Deep within her chest they were always there, her parents, reliably present for meals and lessons, providing beautifully appointed rooms and expensive tutors. Yet a distance lingered, a space filled only by the ticking of the ornate grandfather clock and the rustle of turning pages. Eleanor longed for something warmer, something softer than the perfectly polished surface of their lives. For months, Eleanor had been collecting small proofs of affection, fragile treasures she hoarded like a magpie. A pressed forget-me-not her mother had absent-mindedly handed her during a walk, a smooth river stone her father had once pointed out as interesting. She kept them in a small, lacquered box hidden beneath her pillow. Sometimes, late at night, she'd take them out, tracing their shapes in the moonlight, trying to feel the love she desperately hoped they represented. She noticed how her father's brow furrowed not in anger, but in deep concentration over his work, how her mother's hands moved with swift precision over the lace, her gaze distant. They weren't unkind, never harsh, simply preoccupied. Eleanor practiced the question in her head, shaping it with silent lips. "Do you love me?" But the words always dissolved before reaching her tongue. Too immense, too frightening to utter. The unasked question grew heavier each day, a silent companion shadowing Eleanor's steps. It sat with her during solitary breakfasts in the vast dining room, echoed in the cavernous silence of the music room where she practiced piano alone, and lingered as she watched other children in the park, laughing and clinging to their parents' hands. She imagined asking it at tea time, the words shattering the delicate china quiet. She pictured it floating above the dinner table, disrupting the careful conversation about the weather or her geography lesson. The fear of what the answer might not be, the fear of confirming a suspicion she couldn't bear, kept the question locked tightly within her small heart, a constant, aching weight. One crisp autumn evening, a subtle shift occurred. Mr. Percival, looking up from his ledgers, noticed Eleanor unusually still, staring not at her book, but out the dark window, her reflection pale and solemn. "Eleanor," he said, his voice cutting through the quiet, "is everything quite all right? You seem rather pensive tonight." Mrs. Percival glanced up, her needle pausing mid-stitch, her gaze finally resting fully on her daughter. Eleanor flinched, caught in the sudden spotlight of their attention. The familiar warmth of shame flooded her cheeks. She opened her mouth, intending to say yes, Papa, or just tired, but the practiced lies stuck in her throat. The unasked question pressed against her ribs, demanding release. A fierce storm raged outside later that week, rattling the window panes and howling down the chimney. Eleanor lay rigid in her large bed, the shadows cast by the flickering gas lamp dancing menacingly on the walls. Thunder cracked with terrifying violence, shaking the very foundations of the house. Fear, cold and absolute, overwhelmed her usual quiet composure. The unasked question, magnified by terror, became unbearable. Sobbing, she scrambled out of bed, her bare feet pattering down the long, dark corridor towards the sliver of light under her parents' bedroom door. She pushed it open without knocking, her small frame trembling violently, tears streaming down her face. Mr. and Mrs. Percival, startled from their reading, stared at the distraught figure in the doorway. Eleanor didn't run to them immediately. She stood there, soaked in moonlight and fear, the storm's fury echoing her own inner turmoil. The words, "held captive for so long," burst forth in a choked, desperate whisper that was almost swallowed by the wind. "Do you love me?" she gasped, her voice raw and fragile. "Do you really love me?" The question hung in the air, sharp and simple, shattering the room's stunned silence. It wasn't angry, not accusatory, just profoundly vulnerable, laying bare the lonely ache that had festered unseen. Mrs. Percival's book slipped from her hands. Mr. Percival's face, usually so composed, crumpled with dawning, horrified understanding for a heartbeat. The only sounds were the storm and Eleanor's ragged breaths. Then, Mrs. Percival was moving, crossing the room not with her usual measured grace, but with swift, urgent strides. She sank to her knees, gathering Eleanor into her arms, holding her tight against the silk of her dressing gown. "Oh, my darling girl," she breathed, her own voice thick with tears. "Oh, Eleanor, of course we love you. With all our hearts." Mr. Percival joined them, kneeling awkwardly, his large hand gently smoothing Eleanor's hair. "More than anything in this world," he murmured, his voice rough with unaccustomed emotion, "we're so sorry, sweetheart, so terribly sorry we ever let you doubt it." They held her as the storm slowly abated, whispering reassurances, their embrace warm and solid and real, finally answering the question that had never needed to be asked aloud. Life in the grand house on Elmwood Street didn't transform overnight into constant noise or chaos. Mr. Percival still studied his ledgers, and Mrs. Percival still mended her lace, but the quiet now held a different quality. A comfortable, warm understanding. Intentional moments bloomed. Mr. Percival setting aside his work to listen, truly listen, to Eleanor describe a peculiar cloud. Mrs. Percival leaving her embroidery to sit beside Eleanor on the chaise, simply sharing the quiet companionship of a shared book. The unasked question had been answered not just with words, but with a new, conscious tenderness as Eleanor drifted to sleep each night. The little lacquered box beneath her pillow felt lighter, no longer the sole container of her hope, but a reminder of the whispered promise now woven into the fabric of their days. A love spoken, heard, and deeply felt.